Welcome, dear listener, to another quiet journey into the past. Today, we will wander through the slow, often overlooked moments of history, the ones that shaped lives, ideas, and the world we know, quietly and without fanfare. Here, time moves gently. We will linger in workshops, libraries, and sunlit streets, following ordinary people performing extraordinary acts of patience and care. So find a comfortable place, let your mind settle, and allow the stories of centuries past to unfold, slowly, like pages turning under candlelight. This is boring past times for sleep where history whispers, and you can drift into the calm rhythm of the past. You might imagine the streets of a Qing dynasty city, narrow and winding, lined with wooden houses whose rooftops gently curve toward the sky. The air carries a muted mixture of the earthy aroma of wood, the occasional scent of a distant market, and, if you are close enough, the subtle fragrance of herbs. For ordinary families living during this period, life was governed less by the dramatic events that dominate history books and more by the rhythms of survival, routine, and domestic tranquility. It is here, in these quiet, often overlooked details, that the story of herbal teas unfolds, an unassuming yet pervasive thread in the tapestry of daily Qing life. Herbal teas were not the ceremonial extravagances of imperial courts, nor were they exclusively for the elite. In countless households, from the bustling cities of Jiangnan to the more remote villages of Sichuan, families brewed teas for health, sleep, and the small comforts of the evening. These teas were subtle allies in a life otherwise marked by labor, limited medical knowledge, and the constant negotiation between human fragility and the natural world. At the heart of these teas were ingredients that seem ordinary to modern eyes: chrysanthemums, jujube, dates, honeysuckle, and the fragrant leaves of mint or muk. Yet each plant carried with it centuries of observation and experimentation, carefully noted by generations of herbalists. You might picture a mother, weary from tending to her household and children, selecting dried chrysanthemum flowers from a small ceramic jar. She rinses them lightly, places them in a clay teapot, and pours in water heated just shy of boiling. The steam rises in delicate tendrils, carrying a gentle floral scent that hints at calmness, and by the time the tea has cooled to the perfect sipping temperature, a quiet ritual has begun, the winding down of a day, a soft preparation for rest. Chrysanthemum, often paired with goji berries or juju, was prized not only for its mild sweetness, but also for its believed medicinal properties. The flowers were thought to reduce heat in the Bodhya concept linked to the traditional understanding of yin and yang, helping to soothe agitation, reduce restlessness, and prepare the mind for sleep. Jujube, small and reddish-brown, contributed both flavor and an additional sense of calm, its subtle sweetness masking the occasional bitterness of other herbs. For the people of Qing China, these combinations were more than taste. They were a form of self-care, a quiet assertion of agency in a world where illness and misfortune were ever-present companions. But the making of tea was itself a precise endeavor. Water temperature, the timing of steeping, the choice of vessel all influenced the eventual efficacy of the brew. Families often inherited small teapots, passed down through generations, each one carrying its own history of quiet evenings and whispered advice. A mother telling a child to steep the flowers until the color is as pale as morning mist, or a grandmother noting that too long a brew could make the infusion too bitter, unsettling the stomach rather than soothing it. This attention to detail, seemingly mundane, is a window into the broader values of the era: patience, careful observation, and the integration of simple practices into daily survival. You might think, of course, that this sounds trivial, and perhaps it is in the grand scope of history. There were rebellions, famines, and dynastic shifts, and yet the lives of ordinary people, their small acts of self-preservation and comfort, were the foundation upon which these larger events rested. The quiet evening ritual of brewing a tea, the careful selection of herbs from a local apothecary or home garden, provided continuity and a sense of control in a world otherwise full of unpredictability. Even the growing of these herbs was methodical. Families who could afford small gardens carefully tended chamomile, peppermint, or jujube trees, observing their cycles with attention to the seasons. The elderly often advised on the optimal times for harvesting, drying, and storing herbs, knowledge refined through decades, sometimes centuries, of observation. Herbs that were gathered too early might be weak and ineffective, while those collected too late could lose their soothing qualities. Each leaf and flower carried a balance of life and time, and the careful attention to this balance was part of the family's tacit understanding of health and wellness. It is important, too, to consider the context of medical practices at the time. Formal medical texts existed, and physicians were consulted, but access was often limited by geography and cost. Household remedies were a vital line of defense, combining practical knowledge with inherited wisdom. Herbal teas were inexpensive, portable, and relatively safer form of preventive care, and, perhaps more importantly, a ritual that reminded people of their own ability to care for themselves. You might see this in the evening routines: a father quietly sipping a warm infusion after work in the fields, or children reluctantly agreeing to a mildly bitter herbal tea, sensing the care that went into its preparation and the small promise of comfort it offered. The daily life of ordinary Qing families also reveals the social dimension of these teas. Evening was not solely a private time. It was also a time for quiet conversation and reflection. Families gathered around low tables, sharing news from neighbors, recalling small local events, and discussing what tomorrow might bring. The shared experience of sipping tea, its warmth and gentle fragrance, became a subtle form of social cohesion, reminder that even amidst hardship, there was shared human resilience. Interestingly, these teas were not always consumed for purely practical reasons. They often carried symbolic weight, a representation of care and mindfulness. The act of preparation, of steeping and sipping slowly, transformed ordinary moments into reflective pauses. It is in these small pauses that ordinary people historians rarely notice them practiced a kind of quiet mindfulness, one that encouraged calm thought, rest, and endurance. You could argue that these teas were not just herbal remedies, but tools of psychological resilience. Long before such concepts were formally recognized, even as the dynasty faced pressures from corruption, natural disasters, and the slow encroachment of foreign influences, domestic rituals persisted. In the subtle fragrance of chrysanthemum and mint, families found continuity and reassurance, an anchor in the flow of time. And yet, despite centuries of tradition, much of this knowledge would slowly fade, replaced by modern conveniences, packaged teas, and the distractions of contemporary life. What we now consider quaint or boring was once essential a lifeline, a carefully honed practice that allowed ordinary people to endure the ordinary challenges of life. As you consider this, you might wonder about the stories that were never written down, the exact blends favored in different regions, the peculiar local variations, the whispered advice that might have been shared only within a family. Did a farmer in Zhejiang prefer mint with jujube, or was chamomile more common in the homes of Ennui? And how did the slow evolution of these herbal practices influence the broader understanding of wellness in Qing China? The details are fragmentary, often preserved only in passing mentions, yet they hint at a sophisticated, if understated, culture of care, one that treated small comforts and health with the attention they deserved. And so, as evening falls over a Qing dynasty household, with the aroma of herbs curling softly in the air and the last glow of daylight fading from wooden floors, the gentle brewing of tea stands as a quiet testament that even in the seemingly mundane, even in the repetitive cycles of daily life, there are moments of subtle magic moments designed to calm the body, soothe the mind, and carry ordinary people through the challenges of their time. Yet, as the water cools and the family prepares for sleep, one cannot help but ask, what other forgotten remedies were there? And what secrets did they hold about the quiet endurance of everyday life? By now, you have a sense of the quiet intimacy of Qing households and their evening tea rituals. But the story of these herbal teas extends far beyond the simple act of steeping leaves in hot water. The preparation and selection of herbs, one that balanced practicality, tradition, and observation. Every family, every village, and even every market had its own subtle variations, creating a patchwork of practices across the empire. In many households, herbal teas were prepared from plants grown in modest gardens or gathered from the surrounding countryside. A farmer's wife in Jiangsu, for example, might harvest chrysanthemum flowers at dawn, when the petals were said to contain the most concentrated cooling properties. She would lay them carefully on bamboo mats, allowing them to dry slowly under the gentle morning sun. By the afternoon, the petals were stored in small ceramic jars, each labeled with careful penmanship, noting the harvest date. This attention to timing and detail was not mere superstition. Centuries of observation had shown that drying too quickly or storing improperly could weaken the subtle effects of the herbs. For families in urban areas, where access to homegrown herbs was limited, local markets provided a different but equally complex system. Merchants sold dried leaves, roots, and flowers in neat bundles or earthenware jars, each with a distinctive aroma hinting at its potency. The marketplace was not only a place for trade, but a hub of knowledge exchange. Elderly shoppers would compare notes on which sellers' herbs were fresher, which harvests had been particularly strong, and which combinations best promoted calm or digestion. Young apprentices or children would observe quietly, absorbing this collective wisdom with each visit. The act of choosing herbs was an education in itself, a careful negotiation between tradition, observation, and sensory perception. Tea preparation also involved experimentation and adaptation. Families adjusted quantities, steeping times, and ingredient combinations according to taste, health, and circumstance. A household with an ailing elderly member might favor stronger decoctions of jujube and longan, believed to bolster vitality, while families anticipating sleepless nights might favor lighter infusions of chrysanthemum, mint, or monk. Some would add small amounts of rice or barley, not for flavor, but to add a stabilizing, grounding effect, aligning with the belief that certain grains enhanced the calming properties of herbs. These adjustments were not standardized or written down formally. Rather, they were part of a living tradition, transmitted orally and through repeated practice. You might imagine a grandmother instructing her granddaughter, "Add only 3 flowers today, or the tea will make you too sleepy before the moon rises." Each instruction contained layers of experience and observation, a subtle blend of empirical trial and inherited wisdom. Over time, these practices created a rich, regionally nuanced understanding of herbs and their effects. Interestingly, the effects of these teas were understood both physically and spiritually. Herbal medicine in Qing China did not distinguish as sharply between the body and the mind as modern science does. A tea designed to reduce internal heat or harmonize the yin and yang was believed to influence mood, digestion, sleep patterns, and even the likelihood of vivid dreams. Families who consumed these teas regularly reported subtle improvements in calmness and endurance, though such observations were anecdotal and subjective. Yet these small, cumulative effects were meaningful, sustaining health, patience, and social cohesion. For instance, a family might combine chrysanthemum with honeysuckle and licorice root to treat both irritability and mild fevers. Each ingredient had its own logic: chrysanthemum for cooling and calm, honeysuckle for clearing subtle heat or congestion, and licorice for harmonizing the flavor and easing digestion. This combination illustrates the sophisticated empirical thinking embedded in domestic life, a quiet science of observation and adaptation, practiced without formal laboratories, textbooks, or published studies. Even the tools of preparation carried significance. Clay teapots, bamboo strainers, ceramic jars, and wooden spoons were selected not only for practicality, but for the subtle influence each material had on flavor, temperature, and aroma. Families often had multiple teapots for different types of infusions: a small, delicate one for mint and chamomile, a larger, sturdy one for root-based decoctions, and a medium-sized vessel reserved for social gatherings or ceremonial sharing. Each vessel had its own personality, shaped by repeated use, seasonal expansion or contraction of clay, and the invisible imprint of countless previous brews. It is important, too, to consider the temporal rhythm of these practices. Tea drinking was structured around daily life and seasonal cycles. During winter months, warming teas with ginseng, cinnamon, or dried orange peel were favored to promote circulation and resist the chill. In contrast, summer brought lighter, cooling infusions, emphasizing herbs believed to mitigate heat, restlessness, and dehydration. Observing and responding to the subtle fluctuations of temperature, timidity, and personal constitution was a hallmark of domestic herbalism, requiring a careful, mindful engagement with the natural world. You can also find small stories of experimentation and adaptation in medical manuals of the era. many of which were accessible to literate households. These texts provided formulas, guidelines, and explanations for common ailments, but they were never rigid prescriptions. A family might consult a manual to verify the recommended preparation of chrysanthemum, only to modify the recipe based on local taste, availability, or seasonal considerations. In this way, household herbalism functioned as both a science and an art, a field where observation and tradition intertwined. Yet despite the meticulous attention to detail, not all teas succeeded equally. Some infusions were bitter or unpleasant, causing temporary digestive discomfort. Others were ineffective for the intended purpose. Families often recorded these outcomes, orally or in small handwritten notes, contributing to a cumulative understanding that guided future preparation. In a quiet way, this trial-and-error method resembles modern experimental science. Though embedded in domestic life and daily ritual rather than in formal laboratories, the social and logical dimensions of tea drinking were equally important. Even in a modest household, the act of preparing and sharing tea reinforced social bonds. A father returning from the fields, a mother finishing her domestic chores, children settling into bed, they would gather to sip the herbal infusion together, exchanging news, recounting minor frustrations, or simply sitting in shared silence. These rituals were not mandatory, but they helped structure daily life, creating predictable moments of calm in a world full of uncertainty. You might consider the subtle power of such practices. A cup of chrysanthemum tea, seemingly trivial, could sustain resilience, patience, and emotional equilibrium over long stretches of time. By the late evening, after the last sips, teapots rinsed and herbs stored away, the quiet familiarity of these routines carried a sense of accomplishment. Families had not only nourished their bodies, but had actively participated in a cycle of care and observation, ensuring continuity, calm, and health. And yet, even in these quiet domestic spaces, questions remained. How did regional variations influence the evolution of these teas? Were certain herbs more prized in one province than another? And if so, why? What did these subtle differences tell us about local climates, economies, and cultural preferences? The knowledge of herbal teas was widespread but never uniform. It was shaped by geography, climate, household tradition, and individual experimentation. Each family carried a slightly different understanding, influenced by the resources available to them, the advice of elders, and the accidental discoveries of repeated practice. In this way, Qing herbalism was not a monolithic system imposed from above, but a network of local knowledge, practical wisdom, and lived experience. And as we consider the intricacies of these practices, we might ask, what stories were lost, forgotten, or never written down? And how might they change our understanding of daily life in Qing China? As the cycles of daily life continued in Qing households, the quiet practice of brewing herbal teas became more than a simple domestic habit. It was a form of endurance, adaptation, and, in subtle ways, cultural expression. By this point, you can imagine the long, recurring rhythm of families tending gardens, selecting herbs, preparing teapots, and gathering in the evening. Over months and years, these routines formed a foundation of domestic stability and health, threading together generations through shared knowledge and practice. One remarkable aspect of these teas is how they reflected a profound understanding of balance. In a world without modern sleep aids, analgesics, or even refrigeration, families depended on observation and subtle intervention. Chrysanthemum to cool, jujube to soothe, mint to refresh. Sherb had a purpose, and combinations were carefully considered for their cumulative effects. Evening teas functioned as both preventive medicine and restorative comfort, helping ordinary people endure the physical and psychological challenges of labor, disease, and seasonal hardship by the end of a long day. When the tea had been steeped and sipped, families experienced more than physical warmth. They shared moments of reflection, storytelling, and gentle conversation. These gatherings, quiet, unremarkable, often unnoticed by chroniclers of grand historical events, were vital threads in the social fabric. A child learning the subtleties of steeping and taste was also learning patience, attentiveness, and the value of inherited wisdom. A mother brewing tea for a sick family member was practicing care that was practical, empathetic, and embedded in tradition. These practices also carried a subtle resilience in the face of unpredictability. Famines, floods, and political unrest were realities for Qing households. While a cup of chrysanthemum tea could not resolve systemic problems, it could stabilize daily life, support health, and provide a sense of agency. In this way, herbal teas were small but meaningful instruments of endurance, a microcosm of human adaptation to circumstance. Over time, knowledge of herbal teas became intertwined with memory, personal stories, and local identity. In southern provinces such as Jiangsu and Zhejiang, families prided themselves on their unique blends of herbs, often inherited from ancestors. These local customs shaped taste preferences, social habits, and even regional notions of wellness. A visitor from Beijing might notice that local teas were sweeter, lighter, or more floral, reflecting differences in climate, local flora, and cultural practices. Even small variations in the size of teapots, the timing of harvest, or the pairing of herbs created a rich, layered tapestry of experience across the Qing Empire. Interestingly, some herbal practices were preserved not only in daily life, but also in written records. Household manuals, personal diaries, and herbal compendiums documented the subtleties of tea preparation, often emphasizing calmness, digestion, and sleep. While these texts rarely reached the broader imperial medical establishment, they captured the lived experience of ordinary people, preserving insights into health and domestic care that modern historians now find invaluable. The written record may have been fragmentary, but it allows us a glimpse into the ingenuity and attentiveness that underpinned these seemingly mundane rituals by the twilight of the Qing dynasty. Changes in society, technology, and economy began to alter these practices. Commercially produced teas became more widely available. Urbanization shifted daily routines, and Western medical practices gradually influenced domestic remedies. Yet, even as formal traditions faded, the underlying principles endured. The idea that simple, thoughtful preparation, observation of natural rhythms, and careful attention to small details could promote well-being. Families continued to brew teas, not just for taste, but for the quiet reassurance and sense of continuity. They offered a legacy of resilience embedded in ritual, reflecting on these practices. it becomes clear that what may appear as trivial or mundane was, in fact, profoundly significant. Herbal teas in Qing households illustrate how ordinary people navigated the challenges of daily life, preserved collective knowledge, and cultivated subtle forms of well-being. These rituals were not dramatic or politically transformative, yet they shaped the rhythms of life, the cohesion of families, and the endurance of communities. The quiet wisdom embedded in the simple act of brewing and sharing a tea demonstrates how the ordinary can become extraordinary when seen through the lens of human resilience and care. And yet, questions remain, whispering across the centuries. How many remedies, carefully cultivated and tested, were lost as families moved, gardens were abandoned, or oral knowledge failed to transfer? Which subtle techniques, regional blends, or personal observations might have offered insights that we can no longer recover? The history of these teas is a history of continuity and fragility, of human ingenuity quietly woven into domestic life, and of practices that survived or vanished according to the whims of circumstance and memory. As you imagine a final evening in a quiet Qing household, with the faint aroma of chrysanthemum and jujube lingering in the air, you realize that these teas were more than simple drinks. They were anchors of calm, vessels of inherited knowledge, and instruments of resilience. They remind us that history is not only shaped by battles, edicts, or grand inventions, but also by the careful, patient acts of daily life. And perhaps, if you listen closely enough, you can almost hear the soft rustle of dried petals, the low murmur of conversation, and the quiet wisdom of centuries steeped in a gentle, unassuming brew. Imagine the Forbidden City, vast and imposing, with its golden rooftops glinting under the early morning sun. The courtyards are meticulously arranged, echoing with the quiet footsteps of palace attendants, officials, and eunuchs. Life here is governed by ceremony, hierarchy, and the pursuit of longevity. Within this world of privilege, power, and protocol, the practice of herbal medicine took on a particularly meticulous and secretive form. Unlike the modest brews of ordinary households, the emperor's teas and remedies were carefully prepared, documented, and often shrouded in secrecy. They were designed to preserve life, enhance mental acuity, and sustain the ruler's capacity to govern an empire. The Qing court employed a cadre of physicians, whose sole responsibility was the emperor's health. These men, highly trained in traditional Chinese medicine, were both meticulous and discreet. Their work combined detailed observation, sophisticated knowledge of herbs, and a constant awareness of the emperor's preferences, temperament, and daily schedule. Each morning, they would assess the emperor's pulse, observe his complexion, and take note of any subtle signs of imbalance or fatigue. From this evaluation, a specific blend of herbs might be selected, brewed, and presented to the emperor at precise times. One of the most renowned practices was the preparation of calming teas intended to ensure restful sleep and clear mind. Chrysanthemum, ginseng, jujube, and occasionally rare imported ingredients were common components. Each herb was chosen not only for its physical effects, but for its energetic qualities, in accordance with yin-yang theory and the 5 elements. Chrysanthemum, as in common households, was prized for its cooling properties and ability to calm a restless mind. Ginseng was added sparingly to strengthen vitality without jujube added sweetness and subtle restorative effects. In rare cases, imported botanicals from Tibet or even Central Asia would be incorporated, each with an associated ritual to honor their origin and potency. The preparation of these teas was itself an elaborate affair. Ingredients were meticulously washed, weighed, and sometimes lightly roasted to bring out their subtle properties. Water quality was critical. It was often drawn from a specific well within the palace, noted for its purity and mineral balance. Teapots were preheated, and steeping times were recorded in palace manuals. Even the temperature of the air and time of day were considered, as these were thought to influence the herb's efficacy. You can picture attendants carefully measuring powders with delicate scales, while a physician supervises every movement, ensuring that nothing is left to chance. Tea consumption in the palace was more than a simple daily ritual. It was a tool of governance. A rested.com emperor was less likely to make impulsive decisions or succumb to irritation. The teas functioned as subtle instruments of control over mood, cognition, and endurance. In this sense, herbal remedies were intertwined with political stability. A minor misstep in preparation, a slightly overheated infusion, or the omission of a key ingredient could have repercussions that extended far beyond the palace walls, affecting the administration of the empire itself. Interestingly, the recipes for these teas were often treated as state secrets. Some blends were recorded in handwritten imperial manuals, accessible only to a select few physicians. Others were transmitted orally, with strict instructions to avoid disclosure. This secrecy underscores the importance attributed to herbal knowledge, which was viewed not merely as medicine, but as a form of imperial strategy. Knowledge of the emperor's daily remedies, after all, could provide insights into his temperament, health vulnerabilities, or even preferred modes of relaxation, a subtle form of intelligence that courtiers and rivals might exploit. The imperial emphasis on herbal remedies also extended to the broader court. Concubines, princes, and high-ranking officials were often given their own prescribed teas, designed to support health and calm. These remedies, though less secretive than the emperor's, reflected the same meticulous attention to balance and timing. Certain teas were recommended before court ceremonies to ensure composure, while others were intended to aid digestion after elaborate feasts. The palace kitchens, therefore, functioned as both culinary and medicinal centers, where flavor, health, and protocol were inseparably intertwined. While these practices may seem highly formalized, they also allowed for subtle human expression. An emperor who preferred sweeter infusions or lighter aromas could have his teas adapted to suit his personal taste. Courtiers often took note of such preferences, not merely for culinary reasons, but to maintain favor, anticipate moods, and navigate the delicate social landscape of the palace. In this way, herbal teas became instruments of both health and social diplomacy, a quiet yet pervasive influence on life behind palace walls. The logistical scale of the operation is remarkable. Ingredients were sourced from across the empire and beyond, sometimes traveling thousands of miles to reach the forbidden city. Merchants, couriers, and palace stewards coordinated shipments with careful attention to preservation, ensuring that dried herbs retained potency. Seasonal adjustments were made, and substitutes were noted in manuals for times when particular botanicals were unavailable. In some cases, exotic herbs were reserved for specific ceremonial occasions, highlighting the symbolic as well as practical dimensions of these remedies. Yet despite the opulence and precision, there were limits to what herbal teas could accomplish. Illness, fatigue, and stress persisted, and physicians had to navigate the unpredictability of human response. Even the emperor, shielded by the empire's resources, was subject to the fragility of the body and mind. Teas provided support, but they did not guarantee vitality. This interplay between careful preparation and inherent uncertainty illustrates the broader challenges of health and governance. Knowledge could guide, but not fully control, outcomes. As you consider the scene, attendants moving silently through corridors, delicate teapots steaming on lacquered trays, the emperor lifting a cup with measured gestures, you might reflect on the subtle power of these practices. Herbal teas, carefully prepared and consumed in the quiet corners of the palace, were instruments of endurance, ritual, and influence. They shaped moods, preserved health, and contributed to the rhythm of daily life in one of the most powerful courts in history. And yet, for all the meticulous preparation and secrecy, questions linger. How did palace physicians innovate when ingredients were scarce? Were some teas more effective than others? Or did the emperor's personal constitution dictate outcomes entirely? Which remedies were truly beneficial, and which were symbolic gestures, reinforcing ritual and hierarchy more than physiology? The answers, partially preserved in scattered records and whispered accounts, invite deeper exploration of a world where calm and wellness were carefully cultivated through both science and ceremony. The daily life of the Qing court was orchestrated with an almost ritual precision, and the preparation of herbal remedies was no exception. Beyond the basic teas consumed for calm and sleep, palace physicians experimented with intricate combinations, carefully noting the effects on the emperor's body, temperament, and productivity. These experiments were less about novelty than about fine-tuning the delicate balance between stimulation and repose, vitality and relaxation. A misstep could leave an emperor restless at night, irritable during court sessions, or sluggish in the morning. Small consequences with potentially vast political ramifications. Imperial physicians maintained detailed logs describing how specific blends influenced the emperor's mood, energy, and even dreams. For instance, a slightly stronger infusion of ginseng might be prescribed after a long audience of officials to sustain alertness without inducing agitation. Chrysanthemum or honeysuckle could be introduced for evenings following emotionally taxing events, intended to ease the mind and prepare the body for rest. These logs reveal a remarkable level of observation. Physicians recorded the emperor's pulse, his complexion, and even anecdotal accounts of his dreams, correlating subtle changes with specific herbal formulas. The sourcing of ingredients was another complex aspect of court herbalism. Herbs were not simply purchased locally. They were collected from across the empire and beyond. Goji berries from Ningxia, ginseng from the mountains of Manchuria, chrysanthemum from Zhejiang, and rare Tibetan botanicals were transported with painstaking care. Couriers monitored moisture, temperature, and storage conditions, recognizing that improper handling could degrade potency. The empire's vast geography, therefore, played a direct role in the composition of the emperor's teas. Seasonal variations, local climates, and regional agricultural practices all subtly influenced what the emperor consumed on any given day. Even the physical presentation of teas carried significance. Cups, often made of fine porcelain or jade, were chosen for their aesthetic and energetic qualities. Some vessels were believed to enhance or harmonize the tea's properties, while others were reserved for ceremonial occasions. The act of serving and receiving tea was deeply embedded in palace etiquette, reinforcing the hierarchy of the court and underscoring the dual role of tea as both a medicinal and symbolic medium. Attendants were trained to observe every detail: the clarity of the infusion, the arrangement of herbs, the sequence of presentation, and the exact timing of delivery. In this way, a simple cup of herbal tea became a highly orchestrated intersection of health, aesthetics, and protocol. The emperor's personal preferences added another layer of complexity. While some emperors preferred lighter, subtly flavored infusions, others demanded stronger, more aromatic blends. Physicians had to calibrate each batch to align with both health considerations and taste. Such adjustments were not trivial. Even minor deviations in preparation could influence both efficacy and the ruler's disposition. One can imagine a physician nervously observing as the emperor lifts the cup to his lips, aware that the subtle balance of energy, tastes, and aroma might have consequences extending beyond the courtyard. The political dimension of these remedies should not be overlooked. Knowledge of the emperor's preferred teas and medicinal practices was closely guarded. Courtiers and attendants who understood these subtleties could anticipate moods, manage interactions, or even gain influence in subtle ways. Conversely, those who ignored or misinterpreted the rituals of tea and medicine risked social missteps or censure. The emperor's daily consumption of herbal remedies was, in effect, an axis around which court etiquette, politics, and influence subtly revolved. Beyond the palace, the influence of imperial teas extended into the broader realm of court-affiliated scholars, physicians, and herbalists. Manuals detailing the emperor's preferred formulas were occasionally copied for study, providing guidance to officials and regional administrators. These documents became part of a wider culture of medicinal literacy, though access remained limited. In effect, the emperor's personal rituals shaped not only his immediate health, but the dissemination of herbal knowledge across the empire. Even experimentation played a discrete role in the palace. Physicians occasionally introduced minor modifications to test subtle effects, such as adjusting steeping times or adding minute quantities of rare ingredients. Results were carefully observed and recorded. Successes might be adopted into routine practice, while failures were noted and avoided in future. The court's herbalism was thus an iterative, empirical process, conducted on a daily basis and finely tuned to the physical and psychological needs of the emperor. Yet, despite all this care and sophistication, there were limitations. No combination of herbs could fully insulate the emperor from illness, fatigue, or the stresses of rule. The best teas could calm and sustain, but they could not cure serious disease or prevent the unpredictability of life. Physicians were acutely aware of this. and part of their training involved managing expectations and recognizing the subtle boundary between efficacy and ritual. Tea became as much a psychological bomb as a physical one, a reminder that careful attention, observation, and routine could sustain resilience even in the face of uncertainty. The rituals of tea consumption also offered moments of reflection for the emperor and the court. Even a brief pause, the gentle inhalation of steam and aroma, provided an opportunity to step outside the pressures of governance. In this sense, the teas were a bridge between the physical and the psychological, the ceremonial and the personal, supporting endurance in a role that demanded constant vigilance. Courtiers, aware of these practices, observed quietly, understanding that the emperor's calm or agitation was often linked to the subtle rhythms of his herbal consumption. By examining these practices, you can appreciate the sophistication and subtlety of imperial herbalism. It was a system that combined empirical observation, ritual, aesthetics, and political awareness, a quiet, yet powerful tool of endurance and governance. And yet, as precise as it was, there remain lingering mysteries. How much of the emperor's calm or vitality was the result of herbs, and how much of it stemmed from other factors, diet, rest, meditation, or even temperament? Were some formulas more symbolic than effective, designed to reinforce ritual rather than physiology? The answers are elusive, preserved in fragmentary records, anecdotal accounts, and the lingering aroma of centuries-old traditions. Even as the palace's practices continued, they invite broader reflection. How do subtle daily rituals, carefully observed and maintained, influence leadership, decision-making, and resilience? Could the same principles apply in quiet ways, beyond the imperial court, to ordinary lives, communities, or even modern routines? These questions remain largely unanswered, teasing the mind with glimpses of a hidden world in which calm observation and subtle experimentation shaped not only the emperor's evenings but, indirectly, the course of the empire itself. By the time evening descended on the Forbidden City, the day's ritual of herbal teas had reached its culmination. Within the quiet chambers of the emperor, a delicate teapot rested on a lacquered tray, steam curling gently into the air. The emperor lifted the cup with measured care, inhaling the subtle fragrance of chrysanthemum, jujube, and rare botanicals imported from distant corners of the empire. This moment, seemingly trivial to an outside observer, was the product of decades of refinement, experimentation, and meticulous observation by generations of palace physicians. These teas, carefully brewed and consumed, served multiple roles. Physically, they supported rest, digestion, and the maintenance of energy levels. Psychologically, they provided structure, calm, and reassurance. Symbolically, they represented the intersection of knowledge, ritual, and hierarchy, the understanding that even in the exercise of absolute power, small, deliberate acts could stabilize, balance, and sustain. The emperor's teas were therefore not merely beverages but instruments of governance, subtly shaping temperament, endurance, and decision-making. The long-term impact of these practices is particularly fascinating. Imperial physicians, through meticulous records and daily observation, cultivated a system of domestic medicine that influenced generations of practitioners, court officials, and regional herbalists. The empire's elite became attuned not only to pharmacology, but to the subtleties of ritual, timing, and human response. By extension, the practices of the court subtly shaped public health, as manuals, oral traditions, and regional variants disseminated outward, informing the ways that local officials, scholars, and even ordinary families engaged with herbs and teas. It is worth noting the balance of secrecy and sharing in these practices. Certain blends were closely guarded, available only to the emperor and his most trusted attendants, while others were gradually integrated into broader medicinal culture. This tension between exclusivity and dissemination created a dual legacy. On one hand, a mystique surrounding imperial health and wisdom. On the other, practical knowledge that enriched daily life across the empire. Even centuries later, historians and herbalists can trace echoes of these practices in surviving texts, regional tea traditions, and accounts of domestic herbalism. The symbolic dimensions of imperial teas were no less important than their practical effects. Presentation, aroma, and ritual reinforced the emperor's authority, discipline, and poise. Courtiers, ever aware of the subtle interplay between health and behavior, observed the preparation and consumption of tea closely. A calm, well-rested emperor was more predictable and, in subtle ways, more governable through etiquette, counsel, and ceremony. In this sense, tea was both medicine and diplomacy, a quiet but powerful element in the complex machinery of court life. Despite the meticulous attention and sophistication, the limitations of these remedies were ever present. Illness could strike unexpectedly, fatigue could overwhelm, and no combination of herbs could entirely shield the emperor from human vulnerability. The interplay of observation, preparation, and ritual mitigated risk, but could not eliminate it entirely. These realities underscore a central lesson. The efficacy of herbal remedies was inseparable from the care, attention, and mindfulness devoted to their preparation and consumption. They remind us that resilience often lies not in absolutes, but in the careful orchestration of small, deliberate acts. Beyond the palace walls, the influence of imperial practices persisted in subtler forms. Herbal manuals, copied and circulated among elite circles, preserved insights into preparation, timing, and combinations. Courtiers and regional officials carried fragments of imperial wisdom into distant provinces, integrating it into local traditions. In this way, the emperor's teas became part of a broader cultural and medicinal ecosystem, linking power, knowledge, and daily life across space and time. Reflecting on these practices invites a consideration of human ingenuity and subtle influence. Small, deliberate routines, whether brewing a tea or observing its effects, can shape behavior, health, and even social order. The quiet diligence of palace physicians, the patient refinement of formulas, and the structured rituals of tea consumption offer a glimpse into a world in which mindfulness, observation, and subtle experimentation were not merely domestic habits, but instruments of empire. As the emperor places the final sip of his tea to his lips, the chamber falls silent. The aroma lingers, a faint reminder of careful cultivation, observation, and tradition. And yet, even within this highly ordered world, questions remain. Which specific combinations had the greatest effect, and which were primarily symbolic? How did the emperor's unique constitution shape the results? And to what extent did ritual, psychology, or expectation influence perceived efficacy? Perhaps these questions are precisely what make the study of imperial herbalism so fascinating, a blend of science, art, ritual, and mystery that endured quietly for centuries, even now. Imagining those steaming cups, carefully weighed herbs, and meticulous rituals invites reflection on the broader human experience. We see that well-being, resilience, and calm are not achieved solely through grand measures, but through repetition, observation, and mindfulness in the ordinary details of daily life. In the quiet elegance of an emperor's evening tea, we glimpse the interplay of care, knowledge, and subtle influenza, testament to the power of deliberate acts, no matter how small, to shape both bodies and worlds. You can picture a bustling Qing dynasty market in the early morning, long before the sun has fully risen. Narrow streets wind between timber-framed shops and stalls, their eaves decorated with faded red paint and carved characters indicating the goods sold within. The market is alive with a chorus of sounds, the clatter of wooden carts, the quiet bargaining of shoppers, the occasional call of a merchant advertising the day's offerings. Amid this vibrancy, there exists a quieter, subtler commerce, one that shaped the rhythms of daily life across the empire, teas, and other medicinal ingredients. Merchants often specialized in particular categories: dried flowers such as chrysanthemum, roots like ginseng and angelica, and exotic imports from Tibet, Mongolia, or even Southeast Asia. Some merchants were traveling long distances to secure rare ingredients, while others maintained permanent stalls in the heart of the city. The success of a market merchant depended not only on quality and freshness, but also on reputation, knowledge, and the ability to cultivate trust with both suppliers and buyers. Imagine a merchant arranging bundles of dried herbs on a bamboo mat, each pile carefully sorted by size, color, and aroma. The scent of mint, honeysuckle, or dried jujube mingles in the air, subtle yet inviting. Buyers, often women tending to households, approach with practiced eyes and hands, selecting ingredients for teas that will calm, nourish, or heal. Knowledge of what to buy is as important as the purchase itself. Selecting the freshest chrysanthemum flowers, the most potent ginseng root, or the sweetest jujube required experience, intuition, and sometimes guidance from older family members. Markets were also spaces of information exchange. Buyers and sellers shared advice on preparation methods, optimal harvest times, and the subtleties of regional variations. A merchant from Hangzhou might describe the superior quality of chrysanthemums from Zhejiang province, while a local farmer explains how the soil and climate influence the flavor and potency of the herb. In this way, markets became hubs not only of commerce but of collective knowledge, connecting distant regions and creating a shared understanding of the subtle science of herbal remedies. The economics of this trade were carefully calibrated. Some herbs were inexpensive and widely available, such as mint or dried leaves used for daily teas. Others, like wild ginseng, rare imported roots, or exotic flowers, commanded high prices and were considered luxury items. Households might purchase smaller quantities of these prized ingredients, combining them with more common herbs to create balanced teas. This blending of high and low, rare and common, illustrates the adaptive ingenuity of everyday consumers, ensuring that the medicinal and calming benefits of teas remained accessible despite economic constraints. Merchants also tailored their offerings to seasonal and regional demand. During the sweltering summers, cooling herbs such as chrysanthemum, honeysuckle, or mint were prominently displayed. In contrast, winter markets showcased warming roots and spices, including ginger, cinnamon, and dried orange peel. Merchants keenly observed these patterns, adjusting stock to match both climate and consumer expectation. The market, therefore, was a dynamic ecosystem in which natural cycles, human health, and commerce were tightly intertwined. Socially, the marketplace offered a subtle form of community. Buyers, especially women managing households, exchanged tips on tea blends, preparation techniques, and local sources. Children accompanying their parents learned the rhythm of commerce and the nuances of herbal selection. The market was a classroom, a place where knowledge about health, taste, and tradition was passed down informally, quietly shaping domestic practices across generations. These interactions reinforced social bonds, fostered trust in merchants, and allowed for the subtle dissemination of practical expertise. Merchants themselves were highly skilled observers. They understood the interplay between quality, timing, and customer satisfaction. For example, chrysanthemums harvested too early or dried too quickly might lose their flavor and cooling properties. Merchants would assess the texture, color, and fragrance of each batch, sometimes performing small taste tests to ensure efficacy. Such attentiveness was critical. A single misstep could undermine reputation, reducing sales and trust. In this sense, the work of merchants mirrored the precision of physicians in households or the imperial court, albeit on a more practical, everyday scale. Interestingly, these market dynamics also shaped the evolution of herbal remedies. Regional variations emerged as merchants adapted to local taste preferences, climate, and ingredient availability. A buyer in Suzhou might favor lighter, floral blends, while a family in Sichuan might prefer stronger, spicier infusions. Merchants responded to these preferences, subtly influencing consumption patterns and contributing to a rich, nuanced culture of herbal tea that reflected both geography and social contexts beyond mere trade. Markets were a nexus of observation and experimentation. Merchants noticed which combinations sold best, which ingredients retained potency longer, and which blends elicited favorable feedback. Such empirical observation informed future offerings, creating a feedback loop in which commerce, taste, and health knowledge reinforced one another. It is here, in the interplay of market practice and lived experience, that we glimpse the quiet ingenuity of ordinary people shaping both tradition and economy. Yet, even in this bustling world of commerce, challenges persisted. Supply disruptions due to weather, transport difficulties, or political instability could impact availability. Merchants had to be resourceful, sometimes substituting ingredients or innovating blends to maintain customer trust. These constraints required both creativity and deep knowledge of the herbs themselves, testament to the skill and adaptability of those who worked in the quiet, essential trade of calm. As the sun rises higher and market activity reaches its peak, families carefully select herbs, merchants adjust their stalls, and the rhythm of daily life unfolds. These everyday exchanges, seemingly mundane, were crucial in sustaining domestic health and the cultural practice of herbal teas. The marketplace was more than a site of commerce. It was a conduit of knowledge, a forum for social learning, and a reflection of human resilience and ingenuity. And yet, questions remain. How did these market practices evolve over time? Which merchant strategies were most effective in preserving the quality and potency of herbs? How did the subtle interplay of supply, demand, and regional preference shape the broader culture of herbal teas across Qing China? The answers are scattered, hidden in dusty records, market chronicles, and family accounts fragments that hint at a complex, fascinating world of trade, observation, and quiet human ingenuity. As the Qing dynasty expanded and its population grew, the trade in herbal teas became increasingly complex and interconnected. Markets in major cities like Beijing, Nanjing, and Hangzhou were not isolated hubs, but nodes in a network that spanned provinces, mountains, and river valleys. Merchants navigated this network with careful attention to supply, quality, and timing, creating a delicate balance that allowed households, courts, and institutions to maintain access to essential ingredients for teas and remedies. One key element of this network was the regional sourcing of herbs. Different provinces specialized in particular plants, shaped by climate, soil, and local knowledge. Ginseng, prized for its vitality-enhancing properties, was predominantly harvested in the cold mountains of Manchuria. Chrysanthemum, valued for its calming effects, thrived in Zhejiang's temperate regions. Honeysuckle, with its delicate aroma and perceived medicinal benefits, was cultivated in Anhui. Merchants developed detailed knowledge of these regional specialties, learning when to travel, whom to trust, and how to transport goods without degrading their potency. Transportation itself posed significant challenges. Roads were often rough, rivers could flood, and winters brought snow and ice that slowed travel. Merchants devised ingenious methods to protect delicate herbs during long journeys. Chrysanthemum flowers were carefully packed between layers of dried leaves, ginseng roots wrapped in straw to preserve moisture, and rare imported botanicals sealed in wooden boxes to prevent contamination. Couriers were instructed on handling, timing, and even the optimal temperature for storage, reflecting an empirical understanding of preservation that was essential to maintaining quality. Markets also functioned as points of innovation. Merchants and buyers constantly experimented with blends, proportions, and preparations. A vendor in Suzhou might notice that combining chrysanthemum with a touch of mint improved customer satisfaction, while a merchant in Sichuan might introduce small amounts of warming ginger to adapt to local taste preferences. Feedback was immediate and continuous, provided directly by customers and observed in sales patterns. These incremental adjustments fostered a culture of practical experimentation, in which commerce and knowledge were inseparable. The social dimension of market trade is equally notable. Markets were not merely sites of exchange, but forums for observation, learning, and networking. Buyers shared insights on herb quality, preparation techniques, and seasonal adjustments. Children accompanying their parents absorbed this knowledge, internalizing both practical skills and cultural values. Over time, these exchanges reinforced community cohesion and facilitated the dissemination of subtle expertise, ensuring that the accumulated wisdom of generations remained active and dynamic. Economic pressures shaped merchant strategies in ways that were often subtle yet crucial. Prices fluctuated according to supply and demand, and merchants had to balance profitability with maintaining reputation. Selling spoiled or substandard herbs could irreparably damage trust, which was more valuable than short-term gain. In some cases, merchants even established informal alliances to ensure consistent supply and quality, effectively creating proton networks of quality assurance. These collaborations reflect a sophisticated understanding of risk management and quality control, long before formal systems existed. Beyond practical and economic considerations, the trade in herbal teas also had cultural significance. Specific blends were associated with festivals, rituals, and daily routines. During the Madadam festival, for example, families might purchase particular teas. These seasonal preferences reinforced cultural continuity and allowed merchants to anticipate demand. In this sense, commerce, culture, and daily life were deeply intertwined, creating a rich tapestry in which even small choices, how to blend herbs, when to sell them, and to whom carried meaning. Yet, despite the apparent efficiency of these networks, uncertainty was a constant companion. Droughts, floods, or political unrest could disrupt supply lines. A poor harvest might force merchants to substitute herbs, sometimes altering flavor, potency, or consumer satisfaction. Transport delays could mean that chrysanthemum flowers arrived wilted or roots shriveled. Merchants and buyers alike learned to navigate these uncertainties, often with improvisation, flexibility, and careful record-keeping. Their resilience allowed the flow of herbal remedies to continue, even in the face of unpredictable challenges. Merchants also played a crucial role in preserving rare knowledge. Recipes, preparation techniques, and storage methods were often passed down through families, blending commercial necessity with accumulated wisdom. A single merchant might hold insights into the optimal harvest times for multiple herbs, or the ideal combinations for calming teas suited to different ages and constitutions. These insights, though rarely documented formally, circulated through marketplaces and households, ensuring that practical knowledge remained alive across regions and generations. In this ecosystem of trade, observation, and experimentation, one realizes that the seemingly mundane act of buying herbs was actually part of a complex, adaptive system. Markets were nodes of commerce, knowledge, and social interaction, linking the distant mountains where ginseng grew to the bustling city streets, where families selected herbs for their evening teas. The quiet diligence of merchants, their attention to quality, and their sensitivity to human needs were essential threads in this fabric, sustaining not only trade but culture, health, and tradition. And yet, the story is incomplete. How did these networks evolve over decades, responding to political upheaval, climate variability, or shifts in consumer preference? Which merchants succeeded and which disappeared into obscurity? How did the subtle experimentation of buyers and sellers influence the broader culture of herbal remedies across Qing China? These questions linger, inviting reflection on the interplay of commerce, knowledge, and human resilience in the quiet, essential trade of calm. As the sun began to set over the bustling city streets, the markets of Qing China gradually settled into a quieter rhythm. Merchants carefully packed away their herbs, making note of what sold well and what remained unsold, preparing for the next day of trade. Buyers returned to their homes, baskets filled with chrysanthemums, jujube mint, or exotic imports. In these seemingly ordinary transactions, a remarkable network of human ingenuity, observation, and adaptation had been sustained. A network that connected farmers, merchants, couriers, and households across vast distances. The influence of this commerce extended far beyond individual transactions. Merchants, through repeated practice and empirical observation, maintained quality, optimized supply chains, and contributed to the subtle refinement of herbal remedies. Their work created a dynamic knowledge ecosystem in which regional differences in herbs, taste, and preparation techniques were shared and preserved. A merchant who traveled between provinces not only moved goods, but also transmitted information, linking local practices to broader cultural trends. In this sense, markets were not just sites of economic activity, preserving and shaping the practice of herbal medicine for generations. Innovation was a constant companion in this environment. Merchants experimented with packaging, blending, and storage to maintain the efficacy of herbs and teas. They observed customer feedback meticulously, adjusting proportions and combinations to meet both taste and medicinal goals. Families, in turn, adapted these blends to their own needs, combining locally available herbs with imported varieties, creating personalized remedies that reflected both necessity and ingenuity. The market, therefore, functioned as a laboratory of practical experimentation, where commerce, culture, and empirical knowledge intersected socially. Markets reinforced networks of trust and learning. Buyers relied on merchants not only for quality, but also for guidance. An experienced seller might advise a young mother on how to combine herbs to calm a restless child, or suggest which flowers were best for evening teas to promote restful sleep. These interactions were quiet, everyday acts of knowledge transfer, but their impact rippled outward, influencing household practices, regional traditions, and, ultimately, the collective understanding of herbal remedies. Economic and environmental challenges were ever present. Harsh winters, floods, or political instability could disrupt supply lines, forcing merchants to improvise or substitute ingredients. Success required resilience, adaptability, and keen observation. Merchants learned to anticipate seasonal changes, source substitutes, and communicate effectively with both suppliers and buyers. These strategies ensured continuity of supply and preserved the trust that underpinned long-standing commercial relationships. In essence, merchants were the custodians of both commerce and knowledge, sustaining culture and health in the face of uncertainty. The cultural significance of these transactions is equally compelling. Herbs and teas were not only functional, they were tied to rituals, festivals, and daily routines. Seasonal blends marked celebrations, household traditions, or moments of reflection. Merchants recognized these patterns and catered to them, subtly shaping cultural practices while fulfilling practical needs. The market thus became a conduit through which commerce, social life, and tradition were inseparably intertwined, reflecting the complexity of human society in even the most routine of activities. As we consider these bustling streets, quiet interactions, and careful preparations, one realizes the remarkable human ingenuity embedded in what might otherwise seem mundane. Markets were arenas where observation, experimentation, and adaptation flourished, enabling ordinary people to maintain health, calm, and resilience. They exemplify the ways in which subtle, everyday practices, selection, mindful preparation, and attentive observation can sustain entire networks of knowledge, commerce, and culture. And yet, as we reflect on these quiet acts, questions remain. Which merchant innovations were most influential, and which disappeared with time? How did local customs shape broader patterns of herbal practice across China? What subtle choices in packaging, blending, or timing made the difference between a successful transaction and a lost opportunity? These mysteries invite curiosity, highlighting the delicate interplay of human skill, environment, and necessity that shaped daily life in Qing markets. Finally, as dusk settles over the city, the lingering aroma of dried herbs, flowers, and roots reminds us that history is often preserved in quiet, ordinary spaces. The merchants, buyers, and couriers of Qing China were not celebrated in grand chronicles. Yet their careful attention, ingenuity, and resilience shaped the rhythms of domestic life. The preservation of knowledge and the subtle culture of herbal remedies. In these overlooked details, we find enduring lessons that human resilience thrives not only in grand gestures, but in patience, observation, and the careful cultivation of everyday practices. In the quiet study halls of Qing China, where sunlight filtered through latticed windows onto the worn wooden desks, a different kind of work unfolded. Here, scholars and physicians pored over manuscripts, scrolls, and botanical specimens, seeking to understand the subtle properties of plants and their effects on human health. While marketplaces and palace courtiers had applied herbal remedies in practice, it was the scholars who sought to codify, systematize, and refine this knowledge. Their pursuit was meticulous, deliberate, and often painstakingly slower study in patience and observation, qualities essential to both medicine and tranquility. These scholars operated at the intersection of science, philosophy, and art. Herbal manuals were not simple lists of ingredients. They included detailed observations about plant morphology, climate, harvest times, storage methods, and preparation techniques. Some texts traced centuries of accumulated wisdom, while others incorporated contemporary experiments designed to test and refine existing knowledge. The scholarly approach emphasized both accuracy and precision. For small differences, whether in harvest timing, drying technique, or combination with other herbs, significantly influence the efficacy of a remedy. Among the most carefully observed subjects were herbs traditionally used for calming the mind and promoting restful sleep. Chrysanthemum, jujube, mint, and ginseng were frequently studied, often in combination, to understand how each element contributed to physiological and psychological balance. Scholars recorded subtle effects, the degree of sweetness in jujube, the temperature at which chrysanthemum released its fragrance, or the strength of ginseng in invigorating without overstimulating. Over time, these experiments accumulated into a rich body of knowledge, combining empirical observation with theoretical principles. drawn from yin-yang and five-element theory. Experimentation was conducted with remarkable patience. Scholars often prepared multiple small batches of a single tea blend, varying steeping times, ratios, and preparation techniques. Effects on human volunteers, whether family members, apprentices, or trusted associates, were recorded in painstaking detail. Diaries would note whether a particular combination improved sleep quality, alleviated restlessness, or even influenced mood during daily tasks. This iterative process reflected both scientific rigor and a deeply human concern for well-being, merging intellectual curiosity with practical application. The work of herbal scholars was not limited to direct experimentation. Botanical collection, classification, and illustration were essential components of their studies. Specimens were pressed, dried, and stored in bound volumes or carefully labeled jars. Detailed illustrations captured leaf shapes, flower structures, root textures, and subtle variations in color or aroma. These visual records were more than decorative. They served as reference points, ensuring that remedies could be reproduced accurately and reliably. A misidentified herb could compromise both efficacy and safety, underscoring the critical importance of precise documentation. Collaboration and correspondence were also vital. Scholars exchanged letters describing experiments, newly discovered herbs, or unusual effects observed in specific regions. Some correspondences spanned hundreds of miles, linking remote provinces with the capital and creating a network of shared knowledge. These exchanges enriched the understanding of local variations, climatic influences, and subtle differences in preparation methods, ensuring that discoveries were not isolated but integrated into a broader scholarly framework. Intellectual debate was another characteristic of this scholarly world. Some physicians emphasized theoretical alignment with yin-yang principles, while others prioritized empirical observation, focusing on taste, aroma, and physiological response. Disagreements could be vigorous yet respectful, often resulting in refined understanding or new experimental approaches. These discussions underscore the dynamic, evolving nature of Qing herbal scholarship. It was not static, but continually adapting to observation, critique, and the integration of diverse insights. Scholars also grappled with human subjectivity. The effects of calming teas could vary according to temperament, health, and psychological state. One person might find a chrysanthemum jujube infusion profoundly soothing, while another might notice only mild benefit. Observing these nuances required both patience and discernment, and scholars developed methods to account for individual variabilities, meticulous adjustments that reflected both scientific and humanistic concerns. These pursuits, though seemingly slow and methodical, were deeply tied to broader cultural and philosophical ideals. In documenting, testing, and refining herbal remedies, scholars pursued a form of tranquility, not only for others, but for themselves. The act of observation, the careful preparation of ingredients, and the detailed recording of effects were meditative, requiring focus, steadiness, and calm. In a society that valued balance, harmony, and the thoughtful exercise of knowledge, these scholars embodied the intersection of intellectual rigor and personal cultivation. Yet, even as knowledge accumulated in manuscripts, jars, and illustrated volumes, questions lingered? How much of the observed effect was physiological and how much psychological? Which combinations were most effective across diverse populations, and which were limited by individual constitution? How could this accumulated knowledge be reliably transmitted, given the fragility of manuscripts and the subtleties of preparation? These unresolved issues underscore the meticulous nature of scholarly work and hint at the ongoing dialogue between theory, observation, and lived experience, a dialogue that continued quietly in study halls across the empire. In this serene and contemplative environment, the pursuit of herbal knowledge was both practical and philosophical. Scholars were engaged not merely in experimentation for its own sake, but in the cultivation of calm, resilience, and human understanding. They remind us that the quest for well-being, even in seemingly mundane tasks like brewing or documenting teas, is an enduring thread in human history, one that requires patience, observation, and careful attention to detail. And yet, as these scholars put down their brushes, inscribed meticulous notes, or carefully measured herbs for the evening's trials, the question remains: which discoveries were preserved, which were lost, and which subtle insights shaped the course of herbal knowledge in ways we may never fully recover? This lingering uncertainty invites reflection, emphasizing that even the most methodical and deliberate human endeavors are subject to the whims of time, transmission, and memory. By mid-morning, the study halls of Qing scholars were alive with a quieter sort of activity than bustling markets or palace courtyards. Sunlight slanted across rows of manuscripts, botanical specimens, and small trays of carefully weighed herbs. Here, the pursuit of knowledge was methodical and patient. Scholars meticulously recorded observations, refining the art of herbal medicine through repetition, comparison, and reflection. Each detail mattered: the moisture of the air, the color of a leaf, or the precise moment a flower reached peak bloom could influence the potency of a remedy and the effectiveness of the resulting teas. One of the hallmarks of Qing herbal scholarship was cross-regional comparison. Scholars often corresponded with counterparts in distant provinces, sharing observations on local herbs and environmental influences. A chrysanthemum grown in Zhejiang might differ subtly from one cultivated in Anhui, not only in flavor but in its effect on the human body, through letters, samples, and diagrams. These scholars built a collective understanding of variation, learning to adapt remedies to both geography and individual constitution. These networks of communication created a sophisticated system of empirical knowledge that spanned the empire. Experimentation was conducted with great care. Scholars often prepared multiple iterations of a single tea blend, adjusting steeping times, proportions, or even the sequence in which ingredients were combined. Outcomes were observed over days, with notes on sleep patterns, digestion, alertness, and mood. Such careful observation allowed scholars to identify subtle differences in effect information that could then be codified into manuals, ensuring that future practitioners could replicate the findings. The process was iterative and slow, but it reflected a deep commitment to precision and an understanding that small variables could produce meaningful outcomes. Observation extended beyond the preparation of remedies. Scholars studied the plants themselves, often maintaining small gardens or potted specimens to examine growth patterns, seasonal changes, and optimal harvesting times. Detailed illustrations captured root structure, leaf shape, flower color, and subtle variations in aroma, providing reference points for later use. These visual records were invaluable, particularly in a time when travel was slow and distant resources could not be easily accessed. Through these combined practices, scholarship merged empirical observation, artistic representation, and applied medicine into a coherent discipline. Collaboration and debate were central to scholarly life. Scholars engaged in discussions about the relative importance of taste, temperature, and preparation method, sometimes disagreeing on the theoretical underpinnings of herbal effects. Some emphasized alignment with yin-yang and the five elements, arguing that balance and harmony dictated the proper combination of herbs. Others focused on empirical results, prioritizing observed physiological effects. These debates, while seemingly academic, drove refinement, encouraged experimentation, and fostered critical thinking, a reminder that even in a highly methodical and cautious environment, intellectual dynamism was alive and essential. Documentation was meticulous. Manuscripts detailed recipes, observations, and classifications, often accompanied by diagrams, annotations, and marginal notes from successive generations of scholars. Some volumes traced the historical use of a plant across dynasties, linking folklore, previous medical texts, and current observations. Such thorough record-keeping ensured continuity of knowledge, though it required careful copying, preservation, and transmission to survive the centuries. Even minor errors in transcription could compromise the fidelity of the remedies, highlighting the fragility and value of the scholarly enterprise. The human element remained central. Scholars observed volunteers carefully, noting differences in reaction due to age, constitution, or temperament. A tea blend that calmed one individual might have minimal effect on another. To account for this, detailed case notes were kept, sometimes recording multiple trials for a single person over weeks or months. These records provided nuanced insights into individual variability, emphasizing that even the most carefully prepared remedies required contextual understanding and personalization. The pursuit of tranquility and health was not merely practical but philosophical. Scholars understood that the act of observing, recording, and experimenting cultivated patience, focus, and mindfulness. The discipline required for accurate observation mirrored the qualities that herbal remedies themselves sought to induce in human subjects. Measured and balanced engagement with the world. In this way, the study of herbs became both a means of producing knowledge and a practice of personal cultivation, reinforcing the intertwining of intellectual and ethical ideals in Qing society. Yet, even with careful observation and rigorous documentation, uncertainty remained. The transmission of knowledge was fragile. Manuscripts could be lost, miscopied, or misinterpreted. Some subtle insights, reliant on the scholar's own perception, might never be fully communicated. The efficacy of a remedy could depend on factors so subtle as to escape written description. A slight variation in drying, an overlooked climate influence, or the unique constitution of the patient. These limitations remind us that even the most painstaking scholarship exists in a context of uncertainty, requiring continual attention, revision, and reflection. As the afternoon waned, scholars returned to their manuscripts, carefully weighing herbs for evening experiments, comparing notes, or drafting correspondence with distant colleagues. Their work was a quiet testament to the interplay of observation, discipline, and human ingenuity. They remind us that the pursuit of calm, health, and knowledge is often cumulative, incremental, and painstakingly detailed, a process that relies on patience, repetition, and attention to the smallest details. And yet, the lingering question persists: which of these observations influenced future generations most profoundly? Which discoveries were lost to time? And which subtle insights shaped the broader culture of herbal medicine in ways we can only partially reconstruct today? These unresolved mysteries illustrate that the pursuit of knowledge, even in a disciplined and careful scholarly tradition, is never fully, completely open to reinterpretation, rediscovery, and reflection. As evening settled across the study halls, sunlight fading through lattice windows, the Qing herbal scholars paused their work, placing down brushes, manuscripts, and carefully measured herbs. The day's observations and experiments were catalogued meticulously, ready to be preserved for future reference. Each entry, diagram, and note represented the quiet labor of patient minds, seeking to understand the subtle interplay between plants, human physiology, and the pursuit of calm. The process was deliberate, unhurried, and profoundly methodical, reflecting the scholar's deep appreciation for the delicate, interwoven nature of life and medicine. The culmination of this work was not just practical, but deeply cultural. Manuscripts compiled generations of observation, bridging empirical experimentation with philosophical frameworks like yin-yang and the five elements. These texts became repositories of both knowledge and values, emphasizing precision, patience, attentiveness, and respect for the natural world. They ensured that understanding of calming herbs, chrysanthemum, jujube, mint, ginseng, and countless others was not fleeting, but could guide future generations, influencing the preparation of remedies in households, marketplaces, and even the imperial court. The iterative nature of scholarship also fostered innovation. By comparing regional specimens, recording the minutiae of harvest and preparation, and conducting repeated trials, scholars gradually refined their understanding of herb efficacy. A subtle change in drying technique could enhance flavor, preserve medicinal properties, or alter the herb's cooling or warming effect. Such refinements were painstaking, incremental, and often invisible to anyone outside the scholarly sphere. Yet they contributed to a body of knowledge that would endure well beyond the lifetimes of the individuals who meticulously recorded it. Scholars also cultivated networks of collaboration and correspondence. Letters and sample exchanges connected distant provinces, allowing insights from one region to inform practice in another. A variant chrysanthemum observed in Anhui might inform adjustments to teas in Jiangsu. An unusual effect noted in a medicinal blend could prompt re-examination and replication elsewhere. Through these interactions, scholarly knowledge became a dynamic, adaptive system, responsive to observation, experimentation, and reflection. In essence, the pursuit of calm and health became intertwined with the disciplined cultivation of understanding across space and time. Equally important was the attention to human variability. Scholars carefully noted the effects of remedies on individuals of different ages, constitutions, and temperaments. One tea might soothe a restless child, while another calmed an elder's insomnia. These distinctions required careful observation and detailed documentation. The scholar's awareness of individual differences underscores a broader principle that medicine, even when informed by rigorous experimentation, must remain adaptable, sensitive, and attentive to human nuance. The intellectual rigor of these scholars was complemented by a philosophical sensibility. Their work was not merely about producing remedies, but about understanding the rhythms and subtleties of life itself. The process of study, observation, measurement, recording, experimentation was, in its own way, a practice of mindfulness. In the careful weighing of herbs, the observation of plant morphology, or the patient recording of outcomes, the scholars cultivated the same calm and attentiveness that they sought to induce in others through their teas. Knowledge and tranquility were mutually reinforcing. The act of study was itself an exercise in balance and care. Yet, for all its meticulousness, the work of herbal scholars was not immune to the fragility of time. Manuscripts could be lost, damaged, or misinterpreted. Subtle insights, dependent on personal observation, could fade with the scholar who recorded them. Despite these risks, the enduring traces of their work, illustrated texts, preserved specimens, and detailed case notes continued to inform herbal practice, influencing markets, households, and even palace medicine. Their dedication ensured that essential knowledge was preserved and transmitted, a testament to human resilience and foresight. As the scholars reflected on their day, questions lingered, both practical and philosophical. Which discoveries would prove most influential? Which subtle observations might be forgotten or overlooked? How could their careful work be faithfully transmitted to future generations? And what wisdom would survive the passage of time? These unresolved questions serve as a reminder that knowledge is never entirely static or complete. It requires continual observation, reflection, and care to remain meaningful. Ultimately, the legacy of Qing herbal scholars lies in the convergence of observation, experimentation, and quiet dedication. Through patient documentation, careful study, and reflection on subtle effects, they created a body of knowledge that preserved both practical remedies and the philosophy of calm. Their work demonstrates that resilience, tranquility, and human understanding are cultivated as much through diligent attention to small details as through grand gestures. In imagining these study halls filled with drying herbs, illustrated manuscripts, and the faint fragrance of medicinal plants, we glimpse a world in which careful, patient observation shaped both knowledge and culture. The scholar's meticulous efforts remind us that the pursuit of well-being is both an intellectual and a practical endeavor, requiring curiosity, discipline, and mindfulness. Their legacy invites reflection that human ingenuity and patience, quietly exercised, can influence not only individual health, but the broader trajectory of culture and knowledge, extending far beyond the walls of a study hall into the daily lives of countless generations. As evening approaches in a typical Qing household, the pace of life begins to shift. Daytime labor, farming, trade, or domestic chores replaced by quiet routines designed to restore energy and cultivate balance. In the kitchens and sitting rooms of both rural and urban homes, a familiar practice unfolds: the preparation of herbal teas, These teas, often simple blends of locally available herbs such as chrysanthemum, mint, jujube, or dried flowers, are more than beverages. They are instruments of ritual, social connection, and the deliberate cultivation of calm in many households. The evening tea ritual begins with careful selection of ingredients. Children or servants may gather the dried flowers, roots, and leaves, inspecting for freshness and aroma. Mothers or household heads weigh ingredients with modest precision, combining small portions into bowls or teapots. The act itself, sorting, measuring, and arranging, serves a practical function of ensuring consistency. But it also has a subtle psychological effect. The slow, deliberate motions prepare the household for a quieter, reflective evening. Attention to detail becomes a kind of meditation, reinforcing calm before consumption. The preparation of tea follows well-established practices. Water is heated in earthenware or metal pots, brought to an appropriate temperature to avoid scorching delicate leaves. Herbs are steeped carefully, often in stages, allowing aromas to release gradually. Some households follow additional procedures passed down through generations, such as rinsing herbs briefly before brewing or arranging the tea in specific vessels to enhance fragrance and taste. Each act, though small, contributes to a sense of order and tranquility, transforming a simple infusion into a ritualized experience. Tea consumption is itself a social and communal practice. Families gather around a small table or mat, sharing the carefully brewed infusion. Conversation is often subdued, focusing on reflection, planning, or storytelling. The aromas and flavors of the tea serve as gentle guides for mood, encouraging relaxation and attentiveness. Even in larger households, where servants and extended family may participate, the shared experience reinforces cohesion, offering both sensory pleasure and emotional reassurance. The rituals surrounding tea extend beyond simple consumption. In some homes, teas are paired with quiet reading, poetry, recitation, or gentle music. In others, the tea ceremony coincides with evening prayers, ancestor veneration, or meditation. These additional practices highlight the multifunctional role of tea. It supports physical calm, social bonding, and spiritual or intellectual reflection. The beverage itself is inseparable from the broader cultural and emotional landscape in which it is embedded. Herbal teas also have practical functions in daily household life. Chrysanthemum, with its cooling properties, helps counteract the heat of summer. Jujube promotes rest and digestion. Mint can soothe minor ailments or refresh the senses. These remedies, while subtle, are integrated into everyday life in ways that require attention and observation. Mothers or household heads often monitor the effects, adjusting blends or timing to suit the needs of children, elders, or workers returning from labor. Over time, these practices accumulate into a deep, experiential understanding of herbs and their effects, passed down through informal education within families. Social life is intertwined with these rituals. Guests visiting a household are often offered herbal teas as a gesture of hospitality, a subtle form of care that communicates attentiveness, thoughtfulness, and respect. The preparation and serving of tea become a medium for etiquette, social signaling, and the reinforcement of household norms. Even minor variations in presentation, choice of vessel, or blending technique can carry cultural significance, reflecting status, taste, or regional preference. The rhythms of tea rituals also help structure domestic time. The brewing and consumption of tea mark the transition from labor to rest, from public activity to private reflection. In rural households, it signals the end of field work and the beginning of evening conversation or chores. In urban homes, it frames reading, study, or quiet family interactions. The deliberate timing and repetition of these rituals create a sense of stability, predictability, and order, offering comfort in the midst of otherwise demanding daily life. Yet, even in these ordinary domestic spaces, challenges arise. Supply of herbs may vary according to season, harvest, or market availability. Families adapt by substituting ingredients, adjusting quantities, or experimenting with local herbs. This adaptability mirrors the larger networks of commerce and scholarship, emphasizing the interplay between knowledge, observation, and practical ingenuity. Even in seemingly simple acts like evening tea preparation, households demonstrate resilience, subtle problem-solving, and attention to detail through these daily practices. Ordinary Qing households contributed to the preservation and transmission of herbal knowledge, recipes, preparation techniques, and the nuanced understanding of herb effects were passed from parent to child, servant to apprentice, embedding centuries of cultural and medicinal wisdom in lived experience. In this way, domestic rituals became quiet yet powerful vectors of knowledge, sustaining both health and tradition across generations. And yet, questions linger. Which household innovations proved most influential, and which were lost over time? How did regional variations shape the flavor, efficacy, and cultural significance of teas? How did ordinary families, often without formal training, integrate these practices into daily life with such subtle sophistication? These mysteries invite curiosity, reminding us that even the most mundane domestic acts contain layers of history, culture, and human ingenuity waiting to be explored. As twilight descends over Qing neighborhoods, the rhythm of domestic life slows into a gentle cadence. The daily bustle of work, errands, and social obligations yields to a deliberate focus on household tranquility. In kitchens, sitting rooms, and courtyards, the preparation of herbal teas becomes both a practical and symbolic activity. These rituals, repeated day after day, reflect the careful cultivation of calm and the quiet structuring of time that characterizes ordinary Qing households. The evening ritual often begins with careful preparation. Herbs are selected for freshness and aroma, measured precisely and arranged in teapots or bowls. A mother, elder, sibling, or household servant may undertake these tasks, performing each motion with attention and care. The act of preparation itself is slow and rhythmic, washing, measuring, layering, and steeping. These deliberate movements not only ensure the quality of the tea, but serve as a meditative practice, instilling calm before the first sip. Even small errors, an overheated pot or overly steeped lafar, observed, noted, and corrected in future preparation, creating a cycle of quiet learning and refinement beyond preparation. Tea consumption is deeply embedded in social life. Families gather to share the infusion, often accompanied by soft conversation, storytelling, or reflection on the day's events. Guests, too, are welcomed with teas carefully brewed to promote relaxation and comfort. The beverage acts as a social lubricant, easing tension, fostering communication, and reinforcing bonds among household members or visitors. Even the choice of vessela porcelain cup, bamboo bowl, or simple earthenware mug contributes to the ambience, with attention to aesthetics enhancing the overall sensory experience. Seasonal variation plays a significant role in domestic tea practices. Summer evenings favor cooling blends, often including chrysanthemum, honeysuckle, or mint, to counteract heat and promote relaxation. In contrast, winter evenings call for warming infusions, incorporating jujube, ginger, or other roots to soothe the body and calm the mind. Households keenly attuned to both climate and personal constitution adjust their blends and brewing techniques accordingly. This seasonal sensitivity reflects a sophisticated understanding of balance and human needs, grounded in observation, experience, and cultural tradition. Children and apprentices often participate in these rituals, learning not only the practical aspects of preparation, but also the cultural and philosophical principles underlying the use of herbal teas. Observation and repetition reinforce their understanding of subtle effects, which combinations induce calm, which aromas soothe, and how slight adjustments in quantity or steeping time can alter outcomes. In this way, knowledge is transmitted organically within households, creating continuity across generations and embedding expertise in lived practice rather than in formal texts alone. Evening tea rituals also provide a space for reflection and self-care. As the herbal infusion releases its fragrance and flavor, household members pause, engaging in quiet contemplation, reading, or conversation. The deliberate slowing of pace, the sensory engagement, and the shared experience contribute to a sense of equilibrium, fostering resilience in both body and mind. In this way, the ritual becomes more than the sum of its parts. It is an intentional cultivation of calm, health, and social harmony. The adaptability of households is noteworthy. Variations in ingredient availability, personal preference, and individual constitution required experimentation. Families might substitute herbs, adjust proportions, or combine familiar and unfamiliar ingredients, effectively conducting small-scale empirical trials within the domestic sphere. These subtle adjustments ensured that teas remained effective, enjoyable, and suitable for all members of the household. In essence, ordinary families functioned as miniature laboratories, contributing to the evolution and preservation of herbal knowledge. Rituals of relaxation were further enriched by their integration with other household practices. Evening teas might accompany reading, calligraphy, or music, creating a multisensory environment conducive to calm. Some households paired tea with reflection on moral, philosophical, or religious principles, blending physical, social, and intellectual nourishment into a coherent evening practice. These layered rituals exemplify the Qing understanding of interconnectedness, demonstrating that domestic calm required attention to body, mind, and social relationships alike. Yet, the practices were not entirely uniform. Regional, economic, and cultural differences produced variations in ritual, selection, and presentation. A household in the Jiangnan region might favor lighter, floral teas emphasizing aroma, while a family in Sichuan might prioritize robust, warming blends. Ingredient availability, market access, and family tradition all influenced these choices. Such diversity highlights both the adaptability of domestic rituals and the subtle ways in which cultural and environmental factors shape everyday life. In reflecting on these domestic practices, one observes that the cultivation of calm was not incidental but intentional, requiring attention, experimentation, and awareness of human variability. Even in the quietest moments of tea preparation and consumption, households demonstrated ingenuity, resilience, and a deep understanding of both practical and cultural needs. The rituals preserved knowledge, nurtured social bonds, and provided a structured transition from labor to rest. Questions linger: which domestic practices influenced broader regional trends, and which remained confined to individual households? How did small innovations in preparation, blending, or timing ripple outward through communities? How did these quiet rituals, repeated across generations, shape cultural memory and the long-term practice of herbal medicine? These unresolved inquiries invite reflection on the subtle yet profound impact of ordinary households in sustaining knowledge, well-being, and cultural continuity. As night settles over Qing households, the soft glow of lamps illuminates carefully arranged teapots, bowls, and dried herbs. The day's labor has ended, and the household turns inward, embracing the quiet routines that define evening calm. At the heart of these routines is the ritual of Tian, everyday practice imbued with social, cultural, and medicinal significance. The preparation and consumption of herbal teas serve as both a bridge between labor and rest and a medium through which knowledge, tradition, and human ingenuity are transmitted across generations, even in modest homes. The tea ritual demonstrates attention to detail and subtle refinement. Herbs are chosen based on freshness, aroma, and intended effect. Water is heated to a careful temperature. Leaves are steeped with patience. Each step, repeated day after day, constitutes both practice and discipline. Household members learn through observation, repetition, and participation, gradually internalizing an understanding of flavor, aroma, and effect. The quiet care invested in these routines reflects an underlying philosophy. Calm and well-being are cultivated through consistent, mindful engagement with small, ordinary actions. Social interaction reinforces the importance of these rituals. Evening teas are shared with family members, guests, and apprentices. Conversation is gentle and reflective, creating a space for emotional connection and communal rest. Even minor details, the order in which tea is served, the choice of vessel, or the combination of herbs carry subtle social meaning, signaling attentiveness, hospitality, and respect. In this way, the tea ritual simultaneously supports individual calm and strengthens social cohesion, highlighting the intertwined nature of domestic practice and cultural continuity. Seasonal adjustments further illustrate the sophistication of domestic knowledge. Cooling blends in summer, warming infusions in winter, and subtle adjustments according to personal constitution reveal a deep, experiential understanding of human needs and environmental influences. These practices also demonstrate adaptability. Households improvise when ingredients are scarce, experiment with combinations, and modify techniques based on experience. Such flexibility mirrors the broader networks of commerce and scholarship, emphasizing that even ordinary families contributed to the refinement, preservation, and evolution of herbal knowledge. The domestic tea ritual is also a conduit for the transmission of culture and expertise. Parents, elders, and experienced household members impart practical knowledge, how to select, store, and brew herbs as well as the principles underlying their use. Subtle observations, such as the effect of steeping thyme on potency or the pairing of specific herbs for calm, are passed orally and through demonstration. This living pedagogy ensures that centuries of accumulated wisdom are preserved and adapted, embedding herbal knowledge in everyday life rather than in formal texts alone. Beyond the practical, tea rituals embody a philosophy of measured, attentive living. The deliberate pace, the quiet observation of sensory details, and the mindful preparation cultivate habits of patience, reflection, and calm. Even the smallest household, with its modest selection of herbs and vessels, participates in a broader cultural ethos that tranquility is achieved not through grand gestures but through consistent, thoughtful engagement with the ordinary aspects of daily life. Yet, these practices are not without subtle challenges. The availability of herbs, the demands of household labor, and variations in individual preference require constant adaptation. Families improvise, substitute, and experiment, demonstrating resilience and resourcefulness. In doing so, they become active participants in the ongoing evolution of herbal practice, blending inherited knowledge with lived experience. Each household thus contributes to a quiet, decentralized form of experimentation and cultural preservation. Reflecting on the broader impact, it becomes clear that domestic rituals of relaxation were essential to sustaining both well-being and cultural memory. They preserved knowledge accumulated by scholars, merchants, and earlier generations, translating it into practices that shaped daily life. They fostered resilience, attentiveness, and social cohesion, ensuring that herbal remedies remained effective and relevant. And they embedded values of care, observation, and mindfulness into ordinary routines, demonstrating that even the simplest domestic acts can have profound cultural significance. As night deepens and the fragrance of steeped herbs fills the home, one is reminded that history is often preserved in quiet, overlooked moments, in the careful measurement of leaves, the gentle conversation over steaming tea, and the habitual rituals that frame each day. These practices, repeated across generations, reflect an enduring interplay of human ingenuity, cultural knowledge, and the pursuit of calm. They remind us that ordinary households, through patience, observation, and care, shaped the rhythms of daily life and the legacy of herbal wisdom in ways that extend far beyond the walls of any single home. And yet, questions remain: which household practices influenced regional or even imperial trends? How did subtle variations in preparation, timing, or social ritual ripple outward over decades and centuries? Which pieces of wisdom were lost, and which continue to shape modern understandings of herbal remedies and domestic care? These unresolved threads invite reflection, emphasizing that even the most mundane acts carefully steeping a pot of to carry layers of history, ingenuity, and human resilience that quietly persist through time. And so, our journey through the quiet corners of history comes to a pause. The workshops, the libraries, the hands that labored patiently, they remain in memory. Even as centuries pass and the world continues to change, remember, the significance of history often lies not in grand events, but in the small, persistent acts of care, curiosity, and human resilience. As you rest, carry these quiet stories with you, allowing the calm rhythms of the past to linger. And when you wake, perhaps you will glimpse, even briefly, the enduring power of ordinary moments that shaped our world. Thank you for joining us in Boring Past Times for Sleep. Until the next quiet journey, may your thoughts drift gently like candlelight across ancient parchment.